Welcome to the second part of our video, discussing what separates the fan favorite show Andor from the rejected Acolyte show. So far, we've covered a few key elements, but we still have 3 more to review. If you haven't seen the first video, we recommend you to watch that one and then return to this one. But for those of you who are subscribed and don't miss our content, let's continue with an element that can make or break any film project. When a fictional world on screen feels so real and immersive that we forget we're watching a made-up story, that's when we know that showrunners have done their job. In the galaxy far, far away, we experience space travel, aliens, droids, and force wielders. And while there have been ups and downs in the saga, almost every production has maintained that sense of immersion. However, there is a big difference between the atmosphere created in Andor and the one created in the Acolyte. Andor is probably the closest version of Star Wars to our reality that we've ever seen, from the way we're shown characters not only planning their next strike, but also the routine of their day-to-day lives. From the working people of Ferrix to the ISB bureaucrats on Coruscant. And since the series takes place during a time when the Empire is such a threat, its presence is felt in every scene, whether through common folks' distrust of Imperial troops or the cutthroat nature of Imperial agents fighting to keep their jobs. Dedra Meero manages to be brutally imposing in front of her enemies and subordinates, but in front of her superiors, we see that she is vulnerable, just as we did in the moment that she's attacked. Syril Karn wants to be more than a replaceable pawn on a forgotten planet, and strives to join the exclusive and prestigious Imperial Security Bureau. We see that he does this so he can gain his mother's respect, and maybe one day, his own. Kino Loy keeps his head down in order to finish his prison sentence. But as soon as he realized that no one would be going home by playing by the rules, we see his eyes shift from fear to determination. And there's no greater illustration of humanity than the speech of Luthen Rael, a man who openly admits that he fights for an ideal that began as an egocentric desire for anarchy. But when he opened his eyes, the trajectory of his crusade had changed into something more noble. He knows he will not live to see the fall of the Empire, but against all logic, he continues his mission to now liberate the galaxy.
Because that's what a man does.
But perhaps the most noticeable example of atmosphere and world building in Andor is in how the Empire is depicted. Even though in modern times, the Empire has been discredited in how Ewoks managed to give its elite troopers a run for their money. In the much parodied "Stormtroopers can't aim" phrase, one may wonder, these guys dominated the galaxy for more than 20 years. How? Well, for the first time since the Empire Strikes Back, we see the true Empire and witness the authentic terror that these guys are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. All of this creates an atmosphere that feels immersive and borderline oppressive to watch. But in the Acolyte, except for certain scenes, the immersion is lost since we see that most of the series happens on sets that we can tell are sets. Not only does this take us out of the story, but when characters change their motivation in such sudden ways, we aren't able to take any situation seriously because there is no commitment or consistency to what is being told. For instance, why does May kill Indara and Torben the moment she has them in front of her, but not Sol? Especially if we take into account that everything that happened in her childhood coven was mainly provoked by Sol. When she finally has him at her mercy, posing as her sister and without witnesses around, she doesn't carry out her revenge. Why? Simply because it was not convenient for the script to eliminate him so soon. They had to leave the way free for Osha to become the real Sith Acolyte. Actually, you know what would be a convenient thing to do to help our channel? Pressing that like and subscribe button below. When we see May and Chimera head to the planet Kofar to kill Kanaka, they already knew where to go and left way early while the Jedi Council was still figuring out May's next step. The Council then realized their plan, had to assemble a team to go to Kofar, and then had to convince Osha to tag along, all before even starting their trip. But despite May's massive head start, the teams all arrive to the planet at the same time. Another convenient plot point is when May escapes from Sol, and both head to her home planet. May's ship crashes quite close to her destination, which gives her more time to prepare for the finale. And why does Basil destroy the ship's cables when he is traveling with Sol and chasing May? Isn't he supposed to be on Sol's team? All these coincidences break our suspension of disbelief and completely remove us from the story. This is also reflected in the characters' appearances. They always look clean, aside from a few instances, even though they're in constant battles and on continuous trips across the galaxy. In comparison, just look at Cassian and Melshi when they're escaping from prison at the end of episode 10, and compare their appearance at the beginning of episode 11 when they manage to leave the planet. They are completely grimy and sweaty. Their white clothes are torn and covered in marks. Their feet are caked in dirt. You can take one look at these characters and know they've been through hell. But Osha, May, and Sol always look equally clean and well groomed, no matter what scene you choose. So, even if it's not always the most noticeable thing, the atmosphere plays a big role in the world the story is part of. It's very worrying that a number of successful intellectual properties are being handed over to such incapable hands. In the case of The Acolyte, we had Leslie Headland, whose only films had quite low validation scores. Another project she was only listed as a collaborator for did have better ratings, but she was not really in charge of it. And yet, Lucasfilm thought it was a good idea to give a multi-million-dollar project to this director who, as we've already seen, was not ready to take control of an IP of this caliber.
I just can't do it, Captain! I don't have the power!
As a result, many bad decisions were made, starting with an excess of scriptwriters, since 10 of them were hired for a series of just 8 episodes. This, among other things, led to there being too many opinions about the direction of the story, which made the plot go back and forth without a true purpose. And since the story, which is the most important thing, was lacking, the rest of the series suffered the same fate. The acting, or rather, the direction the actors received, was downright terrible. Seeing Carrie-Anne Moss wasted like this is a crime. Squid Game star Lee Jung-jae did his best, and even learned to speak English for the role. Daphne Keane, Manny Jacinto, and Dean Charles Chapman's performances were decent, but those of Rebecca Henderson and Amanda Stenberg were unfortunate. Stenberg, who had to play 2 characters at once, never manages to make either of them distinct or relatable. When Osha and May are on screen together, the viewer really can't tell the difference between them. Since they are our main characters, this is alarming. We know that Stenberg can act, so her poor performance can't be entirely her fault. It would all point to the direction, or lack of direction, she received about how to portray the twins. On the other hand, Andor showrunner Tony Gilroy has a much broader career, such as the Jason Bourne saga, Michael Clayton, and The Devil's Advocate. He also rewrote and directed all the reshoots of Rogue One. Although he hasn't been credited for that work, yes, it turns out that Tony was a much more reliable choice than Leslie to give control of a Star Wars project, and we can see that his work is, to say the least, brilliant. The series had 12 episodes, 4 more than The Acolyte, had a total of 4 scriptwriters. The caliber of these writers is also worth highlighting, since in addition to Tony Gilroy himself, there is his brother Dan Gilroy, who is known for writing and directing Nightcrawler, Stephen Skiff, and Beau Willimon, who was showrunner of House of Cards. Clearly, the team behind Andor's script were professionals. The cast of the series was also up to the task. Diego Luna, who is an actor with a long career, gives us a 3-dimensional character, who in addition to being a rebel, is also a man who cares about his family. Adria Arjona, Genevieve O'Reilly, Stellan Skarsgård, Fiona Shaw, Denise Goff gave performances that we all remember. Andy Serkis finally got to shine in addition to being the father of motion capture. And it's gratifying that Star Wars has finally done justice to this actor after wasting him with Snoke. Andor is proof that Lucasfilm should leave projects in the hands of competent directors like Tony Gilroy or Jon Favreau, who, more than just understanding Star Wars, understand their profession, understand film and TV, and understand what it means to make something of quality. They haven't made rush products to follow a trend, but they've brought stories to life that will last for a long time. Disney wanted to explore the possibility of making more seasons of Andor, to which Tony said no, that the story would be complete in 2 seasons. This shows that he won't stretch it unnecessarily by filling it with more content than is necessary to close Cassian's arc.
No more! I can't take it anymore!
In other words, he respects his work, and he respects the viewer. On that note, good producers know how to give the viewers not exactly what they want, but what they didn't know they wanted. And that's our last point. There's nothing wrong with wanting to challenge audience expectations, but it's one thing to want to be risky just for the sake of it, and quite another to take a chance on a story you know can work, but that's outside the box. Leslie Headland surely thought that by making the viewer question the Jedi Order and focusing on characters who openly embrace the dark side, she would have a great story to tell. The problem is that rather than questioning the Jedi, which by the way has been done many times, the Acolyte tried to paint them as evil, while portraying the Sith as misunderstood good guys.
You guys don't understand, this is for real.
This by itself is an insult to George Lucas and the fans. Were the Sith right to execute Order 66 and oppress the galaxy? No, that definitely isn't the point of Star Wars. On paper, the idea behind the Acolyte may have been to show how the Sith perceive themselves as the most enlightened beings in the galaxy, while viewing the Jedi as slaves to an outdated ideal. But in the end, we don't see a critique of the Order as a whole. We only see a couple of Jedi, Sol and Vernestra specifically, who either looked out for their own interests or lied to everyone around them. This brings us back to the point that Chimera should have been the protagonist, since with him, we could have better explored how, rather than immediately corrupting a person, the dark side can give a twisted sense of freedom to its users. But the series is so concerned with letting traditions die and blindly embracing the new, as if everything new was better just for being new.
I don't know what that means.
Questioning the past is fine, yes, but forgetting it and labeling it as bad without valuing the good that led us to the present is a sign of arrogance and ingratitude. All of these ideals were copied from Rian Johnson, another filmmaker who thought he was going to do something daring with his infamous Episode 8. In the end, he only divided audiences because he believed he was the owner of a story that did not belong to him. In complete contrast, ironically, Tony Gilroy has declared himself not to be a Star Wars fan. However, that was no excuse for doing his job poorly or not taking the time to understand the essence of the franchise. Because what is Star Wars at its core? In simple terms, it's the fight of good against evil. But Gilroy wanted to give depth to that good without sanctifying it, and he wanted to give humanity to evil without making them victims. This is when the show took us out of our comfort zone by making us question, how good can the rebels be if they sacrifice one of their own so that the Empire continues to tarnish its image with its tyranny? Just as Saw Gerrera did with Anto Krieger, a character who never appears. He taught us a lesson on how leaders sometimes operate from the shadows in a social movement. Despite seeing heroes, we do not see a clean image like Luke, Han, or Leia. Instead, we see people getting their hands dirty to be able to fight one more day. They don't do morally reprehensible acts because they are bad, but because they are human and they're not perfect. No matter how good their intentions are, heroes can make mistakes, and those mistakes can sometimes even be unforgettable. But does that end justify the means? Especially since we know that in the end, the Alliance won and the Empire was overthrown. These are the questions Andor makes us ponder. Thanks to a director and producers who took the initiative to make a bold project with a message, not just for the sake of being different. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. If you haven't already, make sure to check out part 1 of this analysis and let us know your thoughts in the comments.